Rain pattered against the narrow kitchen window as Clara Benson wiped her hands on a towel and stared at the number glowing on her phone. It had been 7 years since her parents last called, and now, out of nowhere, Margaret's voice trembled through the line. "We'd love to see you, dear. We want to meet our grandson." Clara's breath caught, torn between anger and the ache of missing something she once called family. Eli's laughter echoed from the living room, his small voice filling the hollow apartment with warmth. She forced a smile, whispering to him that Grandma and Grandpa might come visit. Eli's eyes lit up with excitement. In that fragile moment, Clara allowed herself to imagine reconciliation, not yet knowing the storm that waited behind their smiles. 2 days later, Clara stood at the edge of her apartment complex parking lot, gripping the strap of her purse as a sleek black sedan rolled to a stop. Margaret Benson stepped out first, her polished heels clicking against the wet pavement, followed by Thomas Benson, 61, tall and reserved in his tailored coat. They looked exactly as Clara remembered, elegant, untouchable, and cold beneath layers of civility. Eli Benson ran forward with unrestrained joy, throwing his small arms around Margaret's waist. Margaret bent to hug him, her practiced smile betraying a flicker of something unreadable. Clara watched motionless, her chest tightening as years of resentment pressed against her ribs. "He's grown so much," Thomas said softly, his tone almost genuine. Clara forced a nod, already uncertain why her hands were shaking. Inside the apartment, the tension hung like humidity. Margaret Benson moved about the modest kitchen, her manicured hands brushing against chipped cabinets, as if testing their worth. Thomas Benson sat beside Eli Benson at the small dining table, feigning interest in the child's drawings. Clara Benson stood near the sink, watching her mother fill teacups uninvited, her every movement threaded with quiet ownership. "You've done well," considering Margaret said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Clara's jaw tightened. She wanted to defend her small world. The mismatched dishes, the secondhand furniture, the love that filled the cracks. But the words froze. Eli beamed, oblivious, as his grandfather praised his sketches. For the first time, Clara felt like a guest in her own home. That night, after her parents left, Clara stood by the window in Ellie's dimly lit room. The boy slept soundly, his small hand curled around a toy car, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The rain had stopped, leaving the city outside eerily still. Clara thought about her mother's eyes, about the lingering way Thomas Benson had studied Eli, as if measuring him. A pit formed in her stomach. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Her parents never did anything without motive. She brushed a strand of hair from Ella's forehead, whispering that everything would be fine. But even as the words left her lips, Clara knew she didn't believe them. The silence felt heavy, almost watchful. Morning sunlight crept through the curtains, catching the steam from Clara's coffee as she stood by the kitchen counter, replaying the visit in her mind. Eli Benson chattered happily about his grandparents, unaware of his mother's silence. When the doorbell rang again, Clara's pulse spiked. Noah Reeves stood there, holding a toolbox and an easy smile. "Heard your faucets leaking again," he said. His calm presence grounded her for a moment. As he worked, she admitted her parents had returned. Noah hesitated, eyes flicking toward Eli's drawings on the fridge. "Just be careful," he said quietly. Clara nodded, though deep down she knew careful wouldn't be enough. 2 weeks passed before Clara realized how effortlessly her parents had woven themselves into her and Eli's routine. Every Saturday, Margaret Benson arrived with pastries and gifts. Thomas Benson took Eli Benson for long walks through the park. Clara watched from a distance, her smile automatic, her chest tight. The apartment seemed brighter when they were around. Laughter, the smell of expensive perfume, the sound of polished shoes against the hardwood. Yet beneath it all, a strange rhythm pulsed, measured and intentional. Her parents had always known how to perform affection. "We're just making up for lost time," Margaret said sweetly, brushing Ely's hair. Clara nodded, pretending to believe it. But late at night, when the apartment fell silent, she began to sense the script behind their kindness. By the third visit, the gifts had grown lavish. Margaret Benson brought a new tablet for Eli Benson, complete with learning apps and cartoons. Thomas Benson promised piano lessons and private tutoring. Clara Benson protested, saying it was too much, but her mother only smiled. "He deserves the best, darling." Clara's words fell flat in her throat as Eli hugged his grandmother in gratitude. The apartment felt smaller by the minute, each shiny object filling spaces once reserved for handmade things. That night, Clara sat with Noah on the building's rooftop, watching city lights flicker below. "They're buying him," she said softly. Noah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The phone calls began subtly. Margaret Benson would ring just before dinner, her voice honeyed and patient, asking about Eli's schoolwork, his health, his dreams. She never asked about Clara. Thomas Benson sent messages filled with advice about providing stability and building a future. Clara began feeling cornered in her own motherhood. One evening, she overheard Eli telling Noah that his grandparents promised to take him to the countryside soon, without asking her. The words sliced cleanly through her calm. She confronted Margaret, but her mother's reply was cold and perfect. "You should be grateful, Clara. We're only trying to help." Clara felt something inside her fracture. Not rage, but grief that the same game was starting again. A week later, Clara found a letter in her mailbox, embossed stationery with the Benson crest. Inside was a printed copy of an application for a guardianship enrichment program. Her hands trembled as she read, her parents' names listed under prospective caregivers. The words blurred as her heart raced. When she called Thomas Benson, 61 male, he answered with chilling calm. "It's just paperwork, dear. Nothing to worry about." Clara Benson hung up before he finished. That night, she stood on her balcony, the city humming below, the paper fluttering in her hands. She realized then that her parents hadn't changed at all. They'd only become better liars. Clara drove to her parents' mansion the next morning, heart hammering, the letter clutched tight. The gates opened soundlessly, swallowing her small car in the long driveway lined with perfect hedges. Inside, Margaret Benson and Thomas Benson waited in the sitting room, porcelain cups poised in their hands as if nothing were wrong. "You're overreacting," her mother said coolly. "We only want what's best for Eli." Clara Benson stared at her parents, seeing not malice but certainty, the conviction of people who believed love meant ownership. "You had your chance," she said quietly, voice trembling but firm. As she left, the air felt sharper, as though something sacred had just been severed. Days turned into a fragile truce. Clara Benson tried to carry on, her smile increasingly practiced. But when the phone bill arrived, she noticed unfamiliar numbers. Long calls to a local law firm, the same one her father had used for years. Her pulse quickened. She found Margaret Benson's silk scarf draped over the back of a chair, proof they'd been in her apartment again when she wasn't home. Panic blended with anger as Clara Benson realized they were building something behind her back. When she confronted Thomas Benson, his response was dismissive, polished as ever. "You were imagining things, Clara." His calm voice was worse than shouting. The mask of reconciliation was cracking, and she could finally see the machinery beneath. Clara sat with Noah Reeves in the courtyard behind the building, clutching the letter she'd found days earlier. "They're trying to make me look unstable," she whispered. Noah frowned, scanning the paper. "This looks like a guardianship petition draft." The words froze her blood. She thought of Eli Benson. 6. Male's laughter, how easily he trusted them. "They'll say, I can't provide for him," Clara said, voice trembling. Noah leaned closer. "Then we find proof before they do." The sun dipped behind the rooftops, shadows lengthening like unspoken truths. For the first time, Clara saw her parents not as family, but as adversaries preparing a quiet war. A week later, Clara Benson visited Eli Benson's school to pick him up early. The teacher, hesitant, mentioned that Margaret Benson had attended a meeting there the day before. Clara's stomach turned. "She said she was your mother," the teacher added softly. The words hit like ice water. That night, Clara confronted her mother outside the apartment, the wind howling through the street. "How dare you go to his school without asking me?" she shouted. Margaret Benson's expression barely shifted. "I'm helping, Clara. Someone has to." The tone was condescending, deliberate, the same tone that had broken Clara as a teenager. The anger that rose this time, however, didn't fade. It burned clean and sharp. The next morning, Clara couldn't shake the dread. She scrolled through her emails, searching for reassurance, and instead found a forwarded message. A draft custody petition naming her parents as responsible guardians. Her breath caught. There were attached photos of her apartment, ones she hadn't taken, showing cluttered counters and unwashed dishes. Evidence manufactured carefully. Her hands trembled as she realized how deep the manipulation went. When Eli Benson entered the room, holding a drawing of his grandparents, Clara's eyes welled with tears. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I won't let them take you." He looked up in confusion, then smiled, his innocence a small light in the growing dark. Clara's breaking point came quietly. She drove to Noah Reeves' apartment, rain streaking across her windshield, the guardianship papers in the passenger seat. "They're going to take him, Noah," she said, voice cracking. Noah reached for the papers, scanning the signatures, and his face hardened. "Then we fight back." The words grounded her. They spent hours planning, gathering emails, receipts, and photos, small truths that might expose a massive lie. As dawn began to color the city pale gold, Clara felt a fragile resolve return. She was no longer the frightened daughter they remembered. She was a mother preparing for war. The knock came early, sharp and official. Clara Benson opened the door to a woman in a dark suit holding a clipboard. "Ain't Benson? Family Services. We received a report." The words struck like a physical blow. Behind her, Eli Benson, 6, male, peeked out from behind the couch, still in his pajamas. Clara's mind raced. There was no doubt who had done this. She answered every question with shaking hands, trying to keep her voice steady. When the door finally closed, she collapsed onto the floor, the quiet of the apartment pressing against her ears. Her parents had just lied. They'd turned the system against her. Across the city, she imagined Margaret and Thomas Benson sipping tea, believing they were saving her son from her. By evening, the phone calls began again. Margaret Benson insisting that it was all a misunderstanding. "You're overreacting, darling. We just wanted to ensure Eli's safety." Clara Benson could hear her father's voice faintly in the background, calm and composed. "If you cooperate, things will go easier," he said. The manipulation was seamless, legal, and suffocating. Clara slammed the phone down, the sound echoing through the small apartment. Noah Reeves found her pacing hours later, her eyes red, her voice low. "They've declared war," she whispered. He nodded slowly, then picked up the phone. "Then it's time we make our move." The next day, Clara received a letter stamped with her parents' law firm's insignia. It was formal, cold, and clear. Margaret and Thomas Benson were petitioning for emergency custody of Eli Benson on grounds of emotional instability and unsafe environment. The irony made her laugh, then cry. She met Noah Reeve at the courthouse steps, her fingers numb. "They're pretending to protect him," she said. "They just want control." Noah squeezed her shoulder gently. "Then let's show them what protection really looks like." As they entered the courthouse, the sky broke open in rain, like the world itself acknowledging the cruelty of what was unfolding. Inside the courtroom, Margaret Benson and Thomas Benson sat side by side, pristine as porcelain. They smiled politely as Clara Benson took her seat across the aisle, her stomach tight with nausea. The lawyer's voice droned on, twisting details. Clara's late rent, her her modest income, even Eli's small fever last winter, into ammunition. Every word was a knife disguised as concern. When it was her turn to speak, Clara looked at her parents. "You had everything," she said softly. "Why did you need to take him?" For the first time. Margaret Benson looked away. Silence rippled through the room like wind before a storm. The ruling didn't come that day, but Clara left the courthouse hollow. Noah Reeves walked beside her, silent, the echo of rain-soaked footsteps marking their path. "They'll twist everything until I'm the villain," she murmured. Noah looked at her, his expression steady. "Then we find the truth first." Later that night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Clara sifted through old emails and letters, searching for proof of her parents' deceit. Then she found it. An old document from Thomas Benson's law firm, dated months before their reconciliation. It wasn't love that brought them back. It was strategy. And now, she had evidence. The days after the hearing blurred together. Clara Benson barely slept, waiting for the next call, the next letter, the next attack. Eli Benson grew quiet, sensing the tension. He drew pictures of their family, stick figures holding hands under the sun, and taped them to the refrigerator as if they could keep the world from breaking apart. One afternoon, Clara received another envelope. A temporary custody order, granting her parents visitation rights twice a week. She sank to the kitchen floor, the paper crumpling in her fist. The walls felt smaller than ever. She wanted to scream, but instead she whispered to herself, "I won't lose him." The words felt weak, but they were all she had left. The first court-ordered visit nearly broke her. Margaret Benson and Thomas Benson arrived precisely at noon, smiling as if nothing had happened. Eli Benson ran into their arms, laughing, unaware of the undercurrent slicing through the air. Clara Benson stood in the doorway, her body frozen in place, every instinct screaming not to let him go. "We'll have him home by dinner," Margaret said, voice sweet but surgical. Clara nodded mechanically, watching as their car disappeared down the street. Inside, the silence was unbearable. The sound of a mother's heart breaking in a place once filled with laughter. When Eli returned that evening, he was quieter. He showed Clara Benson a new toy car and mentioned how big his grandparents' house was, how many rooms it had, how soft the carpets felt. Clara smiled weakly, listening to his innocent excitement while feeling her stomach twist. She tucked him into bed and lingered at the doorway, watching him sleep. His childhood was being rewritten in front of her, new traditions, new loyalties, all under their control. Later, she sat by the window, staring at the dark skyline. Noah Reeves had said truth could win, but truth didn't seem to matter anymore. All that remained was love, raw, defiant, desperate. Days later, Clara Benson received notice that a home evaluation would take place. Margaret Benson had reported unsafe conditions. Clara cleaned obsessively, scrubbing floors, folding towels, polishing every surface until her hands ached. When the evaluator arrived, Eli Benson sat quietly at the kitchen table, coloring. Everything looked perfect, but Clara's heart hammered beneath her calm. The woman's polite smile didn't hide her scrutiny. "You're doing your best," she said softly before leaving. Clara nodded, closing the door with trembling fingers. The apartment was spotless, but inside she felt unclean, invaded, judged, cornered by the very people who had once held her as a child. That night, Clara broke down. Alone in her bedroom, the facade finally cracked. She screamed into her pillow until her throat burned, her body shaking with months of suppressed fear. On the nightstand lay photos of Eli Benson. His first steps, his toothless grin, his joy untouched by betrayal. Noah Reeves called, but she didn't answer. She sat on the floor, staring at the photos through tears, until exhaustion swallowed her whole. In that silence, she realized something. Her parents could take everything else, but not the truth of her love. It was the one thing they could never forge or buy. Tomorrow, she decided, she would stop reacting. She would start fighting. Morning sunlight cut through the blinds as Clara Benson spread documents across the table. Noah Reeves leaned over beside her, scanning a series of emails. These were sent before your parents ever showed up, he murmured. The dates matched the early guardianship drafts. Clara's pulse quickened. It was proof they had planned everything. They didn't come back to help, she whispered. They came to take. Eli Benson ran into the room, holding his cereal bowl, cheerful and unaware. Clara kissed his head, her mind already turning. This time, she wouldn't crumble. This time, she would use their own precision against them. The reckoning had begun. Clara Benson visited Thomas Benson's law firm unannounced. The receptionist stammered, surprised, as Clara strode past without permission. She found her father in his office, papers spread neatly before him. You built this, didn't you? She said. He looked up, adjusting his glasses calmly. I built a safeguard, Clara. You've always needed one. The patronizing tone snapped something in her. No, she said, voice low and steady. You built a lie. For a fleeting second, the mask cracked. Guilt flickered across his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by the lawyer's practiced distance. Clara left without another word, but as she stepped into the hall, she smiled. Now she knew where to strike. That night, Noah Reeves, 34 male, sat beside Clara Benson as she composed her statement for the court. Every word trembled with emotion but carried truth like a blade. She attached the emails, the letter drafts, the timestamps. They'll deny everything, Noah warned. Then they'll drown in their own signatures, Clara replied. Eli Benson slept in the next room, the muffled hum of his nightlight steady like a heartbeat. Clara glanced at his closed door and felt something anchor deep inside her. A mother's quiet rage, sharpened into clarity. She hit send. Somewhere, the balance began to shift. The following week, Margaret Benson arrived unexpectedly. We should talk, dear, she said, stepping inside uninvited. Clara Benson met her with measured calm. The older woman smiled tightly, every word wrapped in silk. You've made this harder than it needed to be. We only wanted what's best for Eli. Clara handed her a printed email, one signed by Thomas Benson weeks before their reconciliation. Margaret's expression faltered. You were planning this before you saw him? Clara said quietly. For the first time, her mother's voice cracked. You don't understand. No, Clara interrupted. I finally do. Days later, Clara Benson stood again before the courthouse, but this time her hands didn't tremble. Noah Reeves waited beside her, holding a folder of documents, proof enough to tear her parents' case apart. Inside, the air buzzed with tension as Thomas Benson read the evidence aloud in disbelief, and Margaret Benson sat pale, unable to speak. The judge's tone was cool, impartial, but Clara heard the shift in every word. When the gavel finally struck, visitation rights were suspended pending review. Clara exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Outside, she looked toward the sky. Not victory yet, but peace beginning to stir. Weeks passed before Clara Benson stopped waking in panic. The silence that once felt suffocating now seemed gentle, filled with the small sounds of Eli Benson laughter and the hum of ordinary light. Noah Reeves helped her repaint the apartment, pale yellow, replacing the tired gray that had haunted their walls. Every brushstroke felt like a cleansing. When Eli asked, "Are Grandma and Grandpa still mad?" Clara hesitated, then smiled softly. "No, sweetheart. They're just far away now." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his drawing. For the first time in months, Clara felt the space between breaths widen, a fragile but unmistakable peace. A letter arrived in the mail one afternoon. The return address read Benson and Company Law Group. Clara Benson stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page, a formal withdrawal of her parents' custody claim. No apology, no explanation, just silence sealed in ink. She folded it neatly and slid it into a drawer. That chapter was closed. Noah Reeves found her standing by the window, expression unreadable. "It's over?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes. It's finally over." He smiled, small and genuine, and for the first time she let herself believe it. Spring arrived, washing the city in color. Clara Benson took Eli Benson to the park where everything had begun months before. The trees were in bloom, the air fragrant and alive. Eli ran ahead, laughter echoing as he chased bubbles, floating through sunlight. Noah Reeves sat beside Clara on the grass, watching quietly. "You did it," he said. Clara shook her head, eyes on her son. "We did it." The fear that once defined her had turned into something steadier. Not victory, but endurance. She didn't need revenge or forgiveness. She just needed this moment with the world finally her own. That night, Clara Benson tucked Eli Benson into bed as rain tapped gently on the window. "Mom?" he asked sleepily. "Are we happy now?" She smiled, brushing his hair back. "Yes, sweetheart, we're happy." He drifted to sleep, his breathing even, his toy car clutched loosely in one hand. Clara Benson sat beside him for a long time, listening to the rain and the heartbeat of quiet peace that filled the room. She thought of her parents, of the people they had chosen to become, and felt no anger, only distance. The storm had passed. What remained was hers alone. Months later, Clara Benson stood outside her apartment building, watching Eli Benson race his scooter down the sidewalk, laughter echoing through the crisp evening air. Noah Reeves joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. Clara looked toward the city skyline, the lights beginning to glow against dusk. "Maybe someday," she said softly. "But for now, this is enough." She smiled. Not the fragile one she used to wear, but a real one. The wind lifted her hair as Eli shouted for her to watch him. She did, her heart steady, knowing that after everything she had finally come home to herself.